History tells us that 12,000 years ago, humans were barely surviving, moving in small groups, using simple stone tools, struggling against nature. But buried beneath layers of earth, hidden in silence for thousands of years, there are structures and artifacts that quietly disagree with that story. They are too precise, too complex, too deliberate. And the most unsettling part is not that they exist, it's that we still cannot clearly explain how they were made. Because if this level of technology truly existed that far back, then our entire timeline of human development may be incomplete. For decades, the dominant view in archaeology has been clear. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, humans were transitioning slowly. They hunted animals, gathered plants, and lived in temporary shelters. Permanent settlements were rare, and complex construction, especially anything requiring organized labor, planning, or engineering, was thought to come much later. According to this model, large-scale architecture should not appear until thousands of years after agriculture began. It sounds logical, even comforting. But then certain discoveries began to appear, discoveries that didn't quite fit. One of the most striking examples comes from a site known as Göbekli Tepe. Hidden for millennia beneath a hill in modern-day Turkey, this site dates back roughly 11,600 years. At first glance, it looks like a series of circular stone enclosures. But as archaeologists began to uncover it, something became clear. These weren't random stones. Massive pillars, some weighing over 15 tons, had been carefully carved, shaped, and arranged with intention. Many of them feature intricate carvings of animals, symbols, and abstract patterns. There is symmetry here. Planning. Design. And most importantly, coordination. The question is simple, but unsettling. How did a group of hunter-gatherers, without metal tools, without written language, and without established cities, organize themselves to build something like this? Even today, moving stones of that size requires effort, tools, and teamwork. Yet here it stands, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, older than what we consider the beginning of civilization. The first explanation that researchers proposed was straightforward. Perhaps these people were not as primitive as we assumed. Maybe they had begun to settle down earlier than expected. Maybe this site itself was part of that transition, a place where early communities gathered, experimented, and slowly moved toward agriculture and social organization. In this view, Göbekli Tepe becomes a stepping stone, not an anomaly. But the more the site was studied, the more that explanation began to weaken. There is little evidence of permanent housing at the site. No clear signs of daily life. No storage areas, no simple living structures nearby, at least not in the way we would expect for a settled community. Instead, it appears to have been a place people traveled to. A gathering point. Possibly even a ritual center. Which raises another question. Why would mobile hunter-gatherers invest so much effort into building something so complex, if they weren't living there? This is where the mystery deepens. Because building something like this requires more than strength. It requires knowledge. Knowledge of how to cut stone efficiently, how to transport it, how to balance it so that it stands for thousands of years. And when you look at the carvings, precise, repeated, sometimes symbolic, you begin to see hints of something more. Patterns that suggest shared meaning. Perhaps even an early form of communication beyond simple survival. Some researchers began to explore a different idea. What if sites like this were not the result of slow development, but the remnants of knowledge that had already existed? Knowledge that may have been passed down, preserved, or even lost at some point in the past. It's a controversial thought, because it challenges the linear model of history. We like to believe that progress moves in one direction, forward. But what if it doesn't? There are other sites, scattered across different parts of the world, that seem to echo similar questions. Structures that appear older than expected, tools that show surprising craftsmanship, alignments that hint at astronomical awareness. On their own, each one might be explained. But together, they begin to form a pattern. A pattern that suggests we may be missing something. At this point, several theories emerge. The first is the conservative one. Humans, even as hunter-gatherers, were more capable than we give them credit for. Given enough time and cooperation, they could have developed the skills needed to build complex structures. This theory doesn't require rewriting history, it simply expands our understanding of early humans. The second theory is more disruptive. It suggests that there may have been advanced pockets of knowledge that existed earlier than we thought. Not a full lost civilization in the dramatic sense, but groups of people who developed techniques or ideas that were later forgotten. Environmental changes, such as the end of the Ice Age, could have disrupted these societies. The third theory is the most controversial. It proposes that our timeline itself might be flawed. That we are underestimating how early complex behavior, organization, and perhaps even technology began. Then came a shift. A breakthrough that added a new layer to the mystery. Researchers began to analyze not just the structures, but the context around them. Soil samples, microscopic remains, environmental data. And what they found was intriguing. Around the same time these structures were built, the Earth was undergoing significant changes. The climate was shifting. Ice sheets were melting. Some scientists began to suggest that these environmental pressures may have forced humans to adapt more quickly than expected. To organize. To cooperate. To experiment. In this view, sites like Göbekli Tepe are not anomalies, but responses. Evidence of humans pushing the limits of their abilities under pressure. But even this explanation leaves gaps. Because adaptation explains motivation, but not precision. It explains why people might come together. But not how they achieved such consistency in design and execution. Then comes the twist. When researchers looked closer at the layout of some of these structures, they noticed patterns, alignments that seemed to correspond with celestial events. Positions of stars. Movements of the sun. Cycles that require long-term observation to understand. If this interpretation is correct, it suggests something remarkable. These people were not just builders. They were observers. They were tracking the sky, marking time, encoding information in stone. And suddenly, the question changes. It's no longer just how did they build this? It becomes what did they know? Because understanding astronomical cycles requires patience, continuity, and a system for passing knowledge from one generation to the next. It implies teaching, learning, memory. Now imagine standing there. Not as a modern observer, but as someone 12,000 years ago. You arrive at a place unlike anything you've seen before. Massive stones rising from the ground, covered in symbols you don't fully understand. People gathered, working together, sharing knowledge, participating in something larger than themselves. At some point, I tried to picture what it would take to build something like that without modern tools. The coordination alone would be overwhelming. The patience. The trial and error. And yet, they did it. Not once, but repeatedly. Which means whatever system they had, it worked. And that leads to the deeper twist. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the mystery is not how they built these structures, but why we assume they shouldn't have been able to. Our model of history is based on evidence, but also on assumptions. Assumptions about intelligence, capability, and progress. And when we encounter something that doesn't fit, we try to adjust the evidence to match the model, instead of questioning the model itself. So what if early humans were not simply primitive beings slowly evolving toward complexity? What if they were already capable of far more than we expected, but under different conditions, with different priorities, and with knowledge systems that don't leave obvious traces? If that's true, then sites like Göbekli Tepe are not just archaeological curiosities. They are messages. Not messages in the traditional sense, but signals. Signals that our understanding of the past is still incomplete. And that matters. Because the way we see the past shapes the way we see ourselves. If we believe that progress is fragile, easily lost, then these structures become warnings. If we believe that knowledge can emerge earlier than expected, then they become inspiration.
Human history is not a straight line.
It is a landscape full of peaks and valleys, discoveries and losses, moments of clarity and long periods of silence. And somewhere in that landscape, 12,000 years ago, people stood together and built something that still challenges us today. Not because it is impossible, but because it forces us to rethink what we thought was possible. But if that was true, then something even more unsettling begins to emerge. Because once you accept that humans 12,000 years ago were capable of far more than we assumed, a new question quietly takes its place. If they had this level of knowledge, where did it go? For a long time, archaeologists focused only on what survived: stone, bones, tools. But recently, attention has shifted toward what didn't survive. Organic materials, early experiments, fragile systems of knowledge that could disappear without leaving a clear trace. And this changes everything. Because it suggests that what we see today might only be a fraction of what once existed. At sites like Göbekli Tepe, there are signs that the builders didn't just construct and leave. In some cases, they intentionally buried their own structures. Carefully, deliberately, layer by layer. This wasn't destruction, it was preservation. And that raises a very strange possibility. They weren't just building for the present, they were thinking about the future. Why would a society go through the effort of creating something so complex, only to bury it? One explanation is ritual. Another is protection, hiding something valuable. But there's a deeper interpretation that some researchers consider. What if they were trying to preserve knowledge during a time of uncertainty? Around the end of the last ice age, the world was changing rapidly. Temperatures were rising, ecosystems shifting, coastlines moving. This leads to a theory that feels less dramatic, but far more realistic than lost advanced civilizations. Instead of imagining a single powerful society, imagine multiple small groups, each holding pieces of knowledge. And suddenly, structures like Göbekli Tepe start to look different. Not as the beginning of something, but as the remains of something already fading. Then comes another detail that complicates the story even further. Some of the carvings found on these pillars are not random animals or decorations. They appear in repeated patterns, sometimes positioned in ways that suggest meaning beyond art. Certain researchers have proposed that these could represent early symbolic systems. If that's true, then these structures were not just physical achievements. They were informational ones. A way of storing and transmitting knowledge without writing as we understand it today. At this point, the mystery shifts again. It's no longer just about technology or construction. It becomes a question about memory. How much of human knowledge has been lost simply because it wasn't preserved in a way we recognize? Imagine trying to understand a modern city by looking only at its ruins thousands of years later. You might see buildings, roads, fragments of objects, but the systems that made it work would be invisible. What remains would feel incomplete, even misleading. In a similar way, what if our interpretation of the past is limited not by evidence, but by perspective? I remember thinking about this while looking at images of those massive stone pillars. They stand there silently, carrying meaning that we can sense, but not fully decode. It's like reading a sentence where half the words are missing. You understand enough to know it's important, but not enough to know exactly why. And maybe that's the real tension behind all of this. Not that ancient humans had advanced technology in the way we imagine today, but that they may have had systems of knowledge that were advanced in ways we don't fully understand. Systems that didn't rely on metal or machines, but on observation, memory, and shared meaning. If that idea is even partially true, then it changes how we define progress. It suggests that intelligence is not just about building more complex tools, but about understanding the world in deeper ways. And sometimes, those ways don't leave obvious traces. So when we look back at 12,000-year-old structures and ask, how did they do this? We might also need to ask another question. What are we missing? Because the past is not just behind us. In many ways, it is still around us, hidden in fragments, waiting to be interpreted. And every time we uncover something that doesn't fit, it's not just a discovery. It's a reminder that our story is still incomplete. And maybe that's what makes this so fascinating. Not the idea that ancient humans were impossibly advanced, but the possibility that they were different in ways we are only beginning to recognize. If you've made it this far, it means you're part of that search, trying to understand what doesn't quite fit, what challenges the familiar story. And there's a lot more to uncover. So if you want to explore deeper mysteries like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys questioning the past. Because sometimes, the biggest discoveries don't change what we know, they change how we think.